Welcome to Materialise, the Launch Tabletop podcast. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Hi, welcome. I'm here with Kate, Alana and Karl. Hi everyone.
Hello.
I know I did that totally wrong. That's not what the script says at all, but hey. So obviously this is the Materialise podcast, which is made by Launch Tabletop. And today we're talking to Karl from Archangel Games and Guff Studios. How is Karl? How are you, first of all?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no worries. And Alana and Kate, how are you both doing?
Good, as
Very
usual.
glad it's
Thanks for
Friday.
having us.
Anyone got a drink on hand or not?
Strong bottle of H2O.
Yeah, I've got a bottle of water as well.
I've got cider in the fridge over there, and I'm considering getting one.
Go for it. It's Friday afternoon. All good. All right. So, Karl, I believe, because we're friends and you've told me, that you became a dad not too long ago. How's that working out for you?
Yeah, it's really good fun. Got little George. He's 11 months old. He's just started to walk, which is fantastic. So we've just started to have to move everything out of arm's reach and up off everything.
Has it really been 11 months? I literally thought it was
crazy.
like 2 months ago. That's crazy. Wow.
Yep, it's flowing. But no, it's fantastic. It's so cool seeing him develop and like seeing how quickly he picks stuff up when you teach him or like show him things, like just bouncing a ball to him and then like 2 days later he starts bouncing it back. It's just like,
awesome.
It's just incredible seeing how quickly they absorb and do things.
They're little sponges.
Oh yeah, it's just amazing.
Have you already started thinking about, games for babies?
Not design wise, but definitely I've been looking. It seems most of like even your Harbour games don't start until they get to 2. So I've sort of been looking at everything and seeing what actually exists. But yeah, I think we're gonna have to wait another year. I almost bought a couple. I was like, no, I'll hold off. There could be better things coming out. And I know there's a couple other companies that are only really function over in Europe that do quite young games as well. So I'm hoping to get over to Essen again at some point in the near future. So that'll give me a bit more broad selection to pick from. So yeah,
at that age, isn't everything a game at that age? Like,
exactly.
Let's play the squeeze your spaghetti game.
Yeah,
you win.
Yep.
I remember I was doing a play test, not even a play test. It was my first game, Robots and Rockets, and it had been printed. And I was at a friend organized a board game fundraiser. So they, you paid money to go to this event and then they're raising money. And
I think I was
anyway, but it was for their birthday. It was like their birthday, but they were doing it as a fundraiser. It was like a funny kind of combo thing. Anyway, but so I was there and I was playing the Robots and Rockets with, and it's a game aimed at like younger kids, but probably closer to like 7 or 8 up. And this family was playing, so they had the 2 parents and a child. And the child, I don't even remember how old they were. They probably were like 6 or 7 or so. And they were chewing the cards, like my demo copy of the game. So like, I'm just like, what am I gonna? I can't like, I don't want to play this game with anyone else. So I like said, you take this copy of the game, and they were like, oh, we'll pay you for it. And how much is it? I'm like, oh, just give me like $10. Like it was some token amount. It wasn't what it was retailing. But I was just like, I'd never had a person chewing on the game before. It was a new experience.
Well, there's a game idea right there. Some sort of like legacy game for babies.
Yeah.
Didn't Ivan from Ivan? What's his name? Karl.
Yep, Ivan.
He has a surname. But he did at PAX a couple of years. I didn't see it in person every year. Yeah.
I don't think he's done it since COVID, but yeah, pre-COVID he was doing his is edible games, basically, which was using like you had little teddy bear jubes as your pieces that you're moving around, and then you'd like have houses built out of Tim Tams, and you're like eating stuff as you go. It was really cool.
Yeah,
George is
definitely
at the George is definitely at the stick everything in his mouth stage. I'm hoping by 6 he's lost that a bit, because I hope I can actually play some games with him then and don't have to worry about them going in his mouth. But definitely, it's every single thing is straight in the mouth. So
that is funny. Okay, well, I might move on. We've got our first segment of the episode, which is our launch table tip. And each week in this segment, one of our team will give some advice to do with board game manufacturing or design or related topics. Today it is me, and I am talking about fonts because I love fonts. And the tip today is make your fonts easy to read. So when choosing fonts for your game, try to consider not only the visual style, so something that's either neutral or thematically enhances the game, but also consider how readable it is under challenging circumstances. One of the things that I think is important to think about or to be mindful of is many people are playing their games in not great lighting, noisy environments, potentially places where focusing is difficult. Or not to mention they themselves might be tired if they've played a string of games, or they might have had a little bit of drink, or who knows what's going on. So basically, or they might be new parents, hey Carl. And so basically they may not be at their optimal, mental faculty. And so basically when you're doing your card layouts or your graphic design for your game, whilst I think having typography that helps people feel like thematically connected is really important and useful, particularly for anything that's kind of like the body copy or like your main instructions or like things you're able to do. If it can be as clear as possible, then I think that really helps. So some of the tips that I have specifically for doing that is when you're doing your graphic design for your card or your box or whatever it is, or your player board or whatever, the thing that I like to do really is literally just zoom out on my design app, so make the object really small on my screen, smaller than it is in like real life. And the reason for that is to kind of emulate, so like if you've got a card, you're not always looking at it like close up, you might be looking at it from a distance. And so by reducing the zoom, it can help you get an idea, what does it look like from a meter away, or what's a meter in feet, 3 feet away, 3.5 feet, 3 foot, yeah.
3 feet.
See, we're trying to be international with our stuff here. So yeah, that's one tip. The other one is choosing fonts. This is specifically for small type. Choosing fonts that have more simple shapes, so not ones that are all really detailed and complex. Letter spacing.
Serif or sans serif usually better?
I think
in print, serif has better readability, but not one with lots of sticky outy bits all over the place.
That's conventional wisdom. I've been challenged of that recently a lot because of like Futura. So Futura came out in 1920 something, 24 or 26, but it was a book typeface. It was designed to be read at like 8 or 9 points.
There are some sans serif fonts that are very readable.
No, but what you said isn't like that is definitely the wisdom that is taught, and a lot of like, if you go to graphic design school,
the research holds up. If you look at usability research, serif fonts are easier in print to read.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to just disagree with you on that, because certainly the research I've read is a lot of sans are dominating, and fonts like Comic Sans are even dominating more. They are passing readability beyond what we would expect.
Are we talking about fonts for like bulk text, like rule books, or are we talking about like
the small text
design? Or
no, the small text would be like the small text for like your instructions and like guides and stuff. Yeah, right. The point isn't so much whether it's sans or serif though, because again you can have complex and simple versions in both categories. Yeah. It's more a case of looking for ones that don't have overly ornate, like stuff going on. So that's kind of the one of the things that I think can really help. Letter spacing is the other one, which in some apps like InDesign is called tracking, and so that's basically a global setting that can affect how spaced out the type is. Adding some tracking or adding some letter spacing can really help. So if I'm doing something that's like under 10 point, I might add 10% tracking or 10 points of tracking. It's just kind of doing that, just adding some space gives it a bit of breathing room. High contrast between the fonts and the background. So basically, like if you've got a busy background or a background where the color is very similar to the font color, it can be hard to read. So high contrast in this context basically means like the highest contrast would be a black background with white text, or white text, a black text on a white background. You don't have to be that extreme, but just keep in mind that one is like the difference between the font color and the background color is big enough that it makes it easy to read. Avoid the overly busy backgrounds. And then the other one is for small type, there's a thing called X height. So in a typeface, if you think of the lowercase letter X, so the diagonals that are crossed over, how tall that is in comparison to the capitals is called the X height. And how an easy way to kind of measure it is to look at what's called what I would call the waistline of your capitals, and the waistline is usually where the crossbar of the H is going, or where like the B, the two bulbs of the bowls of the B meet in the middle, or the crossbar of the A. And so basically, if your X height or your lowercase kind of letters are higher than that crossbar, than that waistline, it generally can make it seem a lot bigger and easier to read. So if you look at like a font like Arial or Helvetica or Roboto, like they all have their lowercase is really quite high in comparison to the uppercase, whereas a font like Times New Roman, although I need to double check that, but Garamond certainly, like it's way smaller. It's like the lowercase is a lot lower. Anyway, so that's kind of my little tip. That it's ignoring the specific. It's really just trying to, make your type easier to read and do your own testing. Get a print and look at it in different lighting conditions from a distance, or on your screen, zoom out and stuff like that. So yeah,
how much of choosing a font is getting it technically correct versus artistically correct? Like there's a lot of knobs and levers and sliders you can use when it comes to fonts, right? But there's a certain aspect of artistic kind of decision making. If you've ticked all the technical boxes, therefore it looks good?
No. And for this kind of like work, I would say I would prioritize the aesthetics second, like under readability or how how it looks there. Only because ultimately I want someone to be able to read the card or read the the component, the player mat or whatever it is, more than them feel really engaged with it. Like I've got it in my display behind me, but I was looking at Arboretum yesterday, and pretty, but the typeface they've chosen for the names of the trees is like so tiny and so hard to read that I was like really struggling with it in like bright, like I had like all my lights on and everything. And to me, it was just like, well, I feel like that could have been a clearer choice, like a different choice would have, like, now in that context, it's not a huge deal because people that play the game a few times would remember stuff based on the icons and the colors, and like, so reading the name is much less important. But if you've got what have I got here? I've got some magic cards. Like if you've got cards that have like lots of little text on them or whatever, then obviously you want that. And even what Magic does, I mean, I know it's a bit of a dated design, but the fact that they have that plain background behind the main text just makes a huge difference for it being able to be legible.
High readability.
So yeah, but in terms of your actual answer though, like with knowing the technical stuff versus like the whatever, I think when you do it enough times, a lot of it becomes intuitive and you don't realize you're doing it. So for me, when I'm going through a font list, I sometimes only later go, why did I pick those 10 typefaces as my kind of short list of the options for this thing? And then I'll realize, oh, they've all got this kind of like, they've all got big hex height, or they're not very complicated shapes, or they're whatever, you know. And then from those, I'll go, okay, which one does feel a bit more medieval, or a bit more fantasy, or a bit more science fiction, or, you know. And so that's sort of, some of it just becomes intuitive, I think, after you've done it a bit. Yeah.
Cool. Very informative. Thanks, Harris.
No, that's okay. And it's and like a lot of other things, it's trial and error. So you just practice and you do it and do prints and have a look and make your game, and then get it back from the printers and go, oh, I wish I'd done that differently. And, you know, you just kind of live and learn in that sense.
Yeah. And above all, test it.
Yes.
Put it on things and give it to people and get them to use it. Everything comes back to testing.
Oh, it does. And I think, like, Kate, you've done a lot of work with like UI, UX stuff, and I think one thing you've certainly reinforced to me heaps is that whole, like, just get people to look at it and get the honest reactions, you know, like, as in the theory kind of doesn't matter almost, but it's the actual kind of iteration of is it doing what we want to do?
Yeah. Theory comes, it's along the same lines as, you know, people talk about intent and impact. Theory is definitely the intent side of things. And if the impact is totally not what's intended, then you got to go back and revise it. So,
yeah.
And also, just on behalf of all the people in the world who are on the wrong side of 45 and whose eyesight's gone to poo, please make your text bigger.
Yeah. Oh, it's so funny. I used to be totally fine with, like, you know, 8-point type as a standard thing, and now I'm like, 10's looking pretty good. Even 11 is, like, sometimes common for me. Makes it hard with games because like cards and stuff are so small, and so trying to fit it is that balancing act of, like, for this, like, some games, you know, where they've got a lot of actions or a lot of info on the text that needs to be kind of done there, it is a really difficult choice, because often you want to have as big, you know, artwork as possible, like, you know, the illustration or whatever. And so there's a definite tension there of how do you do it. And part of it's a graphic design thing, and part of it, I think, is also a game design thing of, like, how much can you make kind of I guess intuitive or like logical, so that you don't need as much text on the card.
And then there's also a technical side of things where most people can't write really concisely. They waffle. And that's why we have technical writers to go,
get good at technical writing.
When you could have used 7. And sometimes you do need to be verbose, if you know, so that there's absolute clarity, but that's generally not the case. You know, it's things like, don't use passive voice. That always uses more in the way of words. Use active voice.
What's the difference? Because I get confused with that.
So passive voice is you will be able to. You will be able to, as opposed to you can.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's you know, one of those things. We're so conditioned to be, you know, not forceful and and not get straight to the point on a card or on something, a token. Get to the point. Don't sit there and go, you can, you know, get to the point. You can do this. You may do this.
I think we know what Kate's tip for next week is going to be.
Talk to Joel about that, because we're talking to him in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
He loves talking about language.
Yeah, I think the interplay between, you know, technical writing, font selection, artistic kind of decisions around graphics and so forth, like, can't be understated. That all these things really tie together.
And for me, working as a graphic designer, so many times in my, like, because I used to do stuff for magazines and other products, I would absolutely, or like books, like with authors, I would absolutely go back to them and say, hey, can we edit this sentence because I've got 2 words that are hanging over and it's mucking up all the rest of the layout, or it's you know, like, and so sometimes, yes, I will do everything I can as a graphic designer to kind of squeeze it all in and make it fit, but there's a point sometimes where it's actually better just to reword the sentence, you know. And
absolutely. Alan and I would spend a lot of time poring over every card in our game, and a lot of it was doing the graphic design, he wanted to get 3 lines down to 2 lines, which meant eliminating a single word, but you can't just make the font smaller. So it became an exercise in rewording
Yes.
Just dozens and dozens of cards just to get that magic kind of 2 lines or whatever. So yeah, it was always fun. And that moment when you realize like, oh, I can reword it this way and it just solves it is really, really satisfying.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, that was our
We
tip.
should
So
move on to the questionnaire.
we're about to do that right now. Perfect timing. So we are going to do, if I can figure out how to use the computer. Oh, there we go. So, Karl, you are going to now be subjected to the Materialise questionnaire. These questions are completely very important for living and will define our respect for you very much going forward. So just keep that in mind as you are answering them. All right. So the first question is, are you more of a heart, a diamond, a club, or a spade?
See, and I knew these were going to come up, so I really should have prepared and thought about how I would answer these. I'm going to say I'm a diamond, and I don't know why. It just, we'll go with diamond.
Because you're sharp as a tack.
We'll go with that. Probably, actually, that's probably a good. It probably is something to do with that I'm very geometric and the having straight lines and everything just is a nicer feel to me.
Makes you feel comfortable. Yeah. Nice.
You're an engineer. I can see the logic there.
Okay. Next one. Dinosaur pirates or space zombies?
Dinosaur pirates just sounds fun. Yep.
I agree.
Space zombies are dumb. Zombies are zombies. Zombies are boring.
But they're in space. How can that be boring?
It'd take you so long to find them. They're just floating around in this.
No, they find you. That's the part. They come after you. Gosh,
it's so slow, though.
Zombies that can travel in 3 dimensions. You're not just constrained to the flat plane of the ground. Terrifying.
Definitely dinosaur pirates. It'd just be fun.
All right. What's your favorite snack or drink when playing a tabletop game?
I reckon probably chips, but I'm a very I was playing games last night. I'm a very conscious player. It's definitely eat, wipe hands.
Chips meaning like crisps or whatever, like
crisps.
Yeah. I don't know.
So probably depends on the people playing with. I may not bring that out depending on who I was playing with.
Yeah. Any particular flavor?
I think what I had yesterday. I pretty well, very bad. I pretty well demolished a whole bag of sweet chili sour cream.
Okay.
I'm an original person all the way. Just plain salt for me, or salt and vinegar maybe. But yeah, I do like other flavors. I eat a lot of chips. I'll be honest with you. I like snacks.
I do love salt and vinegar, but I tend to try and get.
Are we talking potato chips? Or how do you feel about corn chips?
Oh, I love corn chips as well, but I try not to. Well, we cook a lot of nachos, so
that's the way to make nachos, to justify it. Yeah.
It's a meal then. It's not just as
perfect. Yeah, that's great. All right. So next question.
Dice.
Oh,
I'm not even going to let that question get written out.
Okay. Interesting.
Dice you're the first. Yeah. You're the first guest that we've had on, a person that's been on the show that said dice. Interesting.
I love dice.
Do you want to expand on that or not? Yeah.
Dice are just fun. I think you can do so much with dice, and they're like every game has cards where there's, I think, a lot more space to play with dice. So I've made a couple of dice games, and I'm still working on a couple of dice games. And I did a big deep dive into BGG and just looked up every single dice-only dice game and made a massive list of each, like all the mechanics that all these things use. And there's only like 30 mechanics of like the 100 games that's being used with dice. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot of space to play with dice, and they're just fun. Like just rolling a dice and seeing what happens is fun.
It's funny because most of the ones that I can think of that I've played that I would call dice only, that they may have a score sheet, but like nothing really else. They pretty much nearly always push your lap games.
A lot of them are. Yep.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah. Which I guess it makes sense because obviously you're dealing with an inherently kind of randomized thing, so it's kind of a natural fit. But yeah, have you played the Reiner Knizia game? I think it's the last version I played was called Art of War, which had a Japanese samurai theme. I think it was put out by Fantasy Flight, but this is literally like more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
Originally, as I understand it, it was themed around Risk, like it had the Risk branding from Hasbro, but then it it changed.
Yep.
But the thing that I found interesting about it was as a dice game, that you were rolling to kind of take control of these different cards, which had like locations on them. And now I'm forgetting the specific mechanics, but all I remember was I really enjoyed it. For a long time, it was one of my favorite little compact, games because it kind of had a nice mix of push your luck with some strategy, and it wasn't just chaos. Like some of the ones, Steve Jackson Games put out a couple of dice games. Was there like the zombie dice, and then there
zombie
was,
dice is at least a game, but yeah, there's a couple of them. There's one of them that is literally just you roll the like. It's not a. I don't want to say it's not a game because the decisions in the game were basically zero.
Yeah,
it was roll dice to get this result. If you get the result, you win.
Yeah, it's basically Monopoly.
Yeah.
No, at least Monopoly you have choices though because you can.
Oh, I meant more in terms of literally the throwing of the dice. Yeah.
A few years ago, I bought a Harbour game just because it was cute called Unicorn Glitter Luck, and I've got to be really careful because I get that name wrong when I say it fast. And and basically though the original, I think there's a deluxe version now which I haven't played, and I think they expanded on it. But the original one, it literally was that roll and move. You roll a dice or a couple of dice, and then you just move along and you get a thing from it. And it's sort of but it's aimed at like kind of 4-year-old, 5-year-old kids, and so. And it was super cute, beautiful little wooden meeples, like unicorn meeples and stuff. But it was interesting when I first played it. I was a bit just like, oh, I was really wanting more. And I don't know why I was wanting more. Like I was like 30 and I'm playing a game aimed at like 4-year-olds. So like, I don't know what I was thinking, but it was just it was just funny.
One of my favorite games is Quantum and Blueprints, which are both dice-based games.
Yeah.
I've played Blueprints once. Do you stack dice up onto kind of like a?
Yep, you're building them on a card.
Yeah,
right. So that you kind of, I forget the exact sort of the nitty gritty, but you're acquiring dice, and you're using the dice you've rolled to create little buildings using the blueprints that come out. So it's the like a 2-step process, but the kind of accumulating the dice is sort of fun. So
we have someone in the chat that knows about this unicorn game. Hello, Chris. I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those games that I can totally imagine being great for younger kids because they're not as worried about strategy necessarily.
Highly accessible.
Yeah. And also, I mean, like, I know it's pretty cliched, but like Snakes and Ladders is really popular with a lot of younger kids. Like, they're not, it's just the journey of like what's going to happen and
rolling the dice and seeing the result.
For sure.
Yeah. And so I think, like, as much as we can sometimes go, oh, it doesn't have a good decision space or whatever, for the audience, it can work really well. So,
definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've got one more question. Final one of the questionnaire. What fictional character would you invite to a game night?
I'm going to side with Kate again on this one, and say I would probably prefer to play with friends that I don't get to play with.
That is not.
Boo! That's a cop out.
Cop out.
Not at all. There's.
You wouldn't want to, for instance, play. Imagine playing Scotland Yard with Sherlock Holmes. Like, that'd be funny, right?
Would he enjoy it, though?
I don't think he was a particularly nice person. Just,
Yeah, okay, fine, sure. But still, you don't have to have... Look, I'm standing by Sherlock Holmes as someone who I think would be interesting at a game night.
Depends what you're playing, I guess. Like any sort
but also,
of...
which version? Game. Hey, there's some nice Holmeses, isn't there? But yeah.
No, I'm going with friends.
Friends, well, Fine. I'm
Really?
gonna have to start videoing that answer and saying it out loud. No. All good. All right. So what else is on our list here? So that's that. We are now going to go to a short word from our sponsor, who today is ourselves. So here we go. LaunchLab is our small batch print-on-demand service for tabletop games. Whether you want just 1 or 1,000, we have you covered. Select from our library of components to build your next game. We offer high-quality printing and components at a competitive price with fast production time, shipped to almost anywhere in the world. Go to launchtabletop.com to sign up for a free account and start prototyping now. Use the coupon code Materialise, that's MATERIALISE, at checkout to get 20% discount off your next order before shipping. There we go. So that's us. If you're interested in Launch Lab, go check it out. I highly recommend it, but I guess I'm paid to say that, don't I? No, but I do genuinely, obviously, enjoy using it. All right. So, Karl, we'll move on and we'll do our main little interview and chat about game development and that kind of stuff. So, I understand that roughly 2 years ago you helped found or launch a studio called Guff Studios.
Yep, that's correct.
With Mark Carter and Stella Yaha.
Yeah.
I did actually message her literally like a week ago and said, "How do I pronounce your name?" She messaged back and said that I got it kind of right at the time. Obviously, I mucked it up then. But then she also said to me she enjoys hearing how people try to say it. So she's just like, have fun. So, yeah. So you started this, in 2020? Is that right?
We probably started technically every end of 2019, I think, was when we technically started, but properly set up and everything 2020. Yep.
Yeah, okay. And what is Guff Studios?
Sure. So Guff Studios is a publishing, localization, and licensing company. So we've got a couple of different veins of what we're focusing on. So with the publishing and localization, trying to bring great games into Australia, so localizing games from the rest of the world into the Australian, Southeast Asian, New Zealand market, and publishing going the other way, so finding Australian, New Zealand, Southeast Asian designers, artists, etc., making games and then pushing that out to the world, and then sort of doing a little bit of licensing as well. So Mark has a lot of experience in licensing in sort of his past career as well. So, for example, we just did a licensed graphic novel for Thunderworks, which is in the current campaign based on the World of Warlords. So doing licensed graphic novels and comics and that sort of thing within board game spaces, which is another cool thing. Yeah.
And so what's your main sort of like role or part in the company?
Yep. So with the three of us, obviously, we're all wearing a lot of different hats, being fairly small, but primarily doing development, and then the sort of manufacturing side of things. And then I'm sort of doing a lot of the shipping and sorting out all that sort of stuff as well at the minute. Is the current thing that I've been spending time is we're sort of at that point of our our most recent Kickstarter campaign. So playing around with all that sort of stuff and trying to work out shipping and containers and all that fun stuff. So.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's very.
It is a thing.
We are definitely going to be doing some, I think, multiple episodes on those, like related to logistics and actually getting games into people's hands, because there's so many steps to it. Yeah, okay.
It's a big topic.
Yeah. So what I want to focus on today is the game development stuff, and I also understand, again, because we have spoken before, believe it or not, that you do game development kind of as a freelancer or for other companies as well. And so, can you just maybe, for our audience, can you explain what do you define game development as? Like in a nutshell, what's your kind of perspective on it?
Yep. So, and I think it's something that gets a little bit confused between people that aren't in the industry side of it a little bit. So for me, you've got design and development. So design is coming up with the game itself. So the person who creates the initial concept and works it up to that 80, 90, 95% complete. Development is then the person, which I think historically used to be just the people that owned the company were doing development. Now I think there's a lot more, or there is a lot more development studios as the industry is growing and becoming a lot more established. There's a lot more development studios and external people that you can go to do development, which is basically, I consider it the same as, say, a book editor. So a writer writes the book and then an editor takes that and makes it great, or a musician makes their piece of music and a producer then finishes it off and puts on those finishing touches. So a developer is basically doing the exact same thing for a board game, that you're taking the design that someone else has made and putting on those finishing touches, cutting out the bits that aren't actually needed, that the designer probably finds quite difficult to get rid of because they've been in there from the start and they love, and I know that myself, it's a challenging thing. So being able to look at it with it's under a very different lens from design. I think that it's more of a how do we just tidy this thing up and really condense it and make it the best it can be. Where I think design is much more outwards, development is sort of a lot more bringing it in and getting to that final end product stage.
Do you feel that development also, and this is obviously a loaded question, do you feel that development has also more of a focus on the actual, how do we make this a real product, worrying about the components, worrying about the manufacturing, whereas maybe the game designer, yes, it's in their mind, but they don't necessarily have to solve all of those problems when they're coming up with the
I'd agree with that. It's funny you say that, only because as you're saying it, I'm thinking through it, and so as a designer myself, I definitely am always considering that. But I guess it's because I'm in the space as well. So for me, I often set constraints right at the very start of when I start making a game of what that is, to make sure that I'm sticking within a certain price point or something based on what I'm trying to do with the game. But yes, I think you're right. A lot of designers, especially newer designers, aren't going to have the knowledge of that and aren't going to be thinking about that side of it. So definitely you're looking at what the components are in the game, what price point you're trying to hit for where you think the product's actually going to sell. And I guess this is where it sort of becomes a little bit bigger than just, it's almost product design. So sort of you start stepping into that space as well. Considering if you need to cut X amount of components to get the price down to a certain point to be able to sell it at the price that the product's going to be able to be sold at, and so on. So I think there's definitely a part of that as well, of being able to analyze it and see where it needs to be, which I think probably for with Guff is probably working more with the rest of our team and working out what we want to do with the product. With freelance, again, it's working with the client for what they want the product to be, and then I'd say the development is the actual making it meet those constraints that have been put in place, of cutting it down and making it fit.
So how do you approach, like, if you are doing, like, you are editing out, other systems or mechanics or elements from a game, how do you approach it if the designer just, disagrees with your choices, or, is there any kind of, like, you've noticed a bit of a pattern with how things have worked, or?
I think it depends which space you're playing in. So as a publisher, we've more or less got final say. So obviously that's all pre-arranged in contracts of who has final say, how much input that the designer has, when they can choose to pull the pin, and so on. But more or less, so with Floating Floors, which was on Kickstarter earlier this year, we pretty well had final say over what it was. Obviously, we're going back and forth with the designer and taking their feedback on board. They've been working on it a lot longer than we have, so they're going to have a lot better insights into why they've done a certain thing. So you definitely get little bits of insight if you try to take something out. The designer says, well, actually, that's there to solve these problems or for these reasons. So then working around that. So I think from that perspective, there's probably a lot more freedom from a development point of view of what you can do with it. Working for clients in a freelance sense, you generally try and set up or have a clear scope from the client of what they want, of what they want to get out of the actual the end product, that what they want that to be. If there's certain things that they don't want removed at all, it is usually a question like, what don't you want to be changed in this thing? If, like, what's the key thing, that what do you think the game is? What's the core thing in the game that you've put in? And then trying not to manipulate that, because obviously that's what they think it is. That's what they think the core of their game is, but that might not be necessarily what it is. So being able to work around that, and usually a bit of back and forth with the client as well. So I've done some projects where I've been working on a game for 6 months and having weekly meetings with the client, and some where it's been say 3 months and meeting with them once in the middle to show them where we're at, get a bit of feedback, and then work on it more after that feedback. So it all varies from client to client. Definitely, there's a lot of ways it can work. It's just setting all that out initially, what the client wants, and I find having free reign can be it's probably a little bit easier. Having probably same as an artist, having a client pushing you in certain ways all the time doesn't maybe give you the creative freedom to make the thing as great as it can be. But yeah, I think I answered the question there.
Yeah. And I mean, look, it's such a subjective thing, because every relationship that you have with whenever you're working together with anyone on something, there's going to be, the personalities or the criteria of that particular circumstance will create different things. Like, both as a game designer and a graphic designer, I've worked on projects where, I worked on a project with for Alana and Alan for Robots and Rockets Lightspeed, where we had to fit a very specific cost, like manufacturing cost for the game. And so it was like that dominated all of the decisions for what do we, like, how many cards can we put in, how big is it, and it was just a factor that we had, like, that was the thing that was the thing that defined the thing. And everything then had to come from that. But then other, times I've worked with people, and cost isn't, like, they don't care if it's an expensive product, because that's for what they're aiming for. That's not necessarily the main factor. And it's interesting. And so with the development, do you have it when someone's, you've taken on a contract, or you've got it, you signed a game with Guff or whatever? Do you have any kind of process, like steps that you kind of go, okay, I'm going to tackle this part first, or I'm going to or is there any kind of system, or is it just kind of like they're all different? And
that's a good question. So I think obviously it's finding out right initially at the start what the client wants, whether that's as a publisher or otherwise, and then just playing the game and seeing how it works, working out what it's doing, and knowing, having a brief, or having the, I think it's always really interesting getting the pitch from the client of what they pitch their game as and what they think their game is, versus what it actually is. And then trying to align those things. So I think it completely depends on what stage the game's at that it's come to. I've done some development projects that were at what I would, at least visually, would consider sort of quite early prototype, that we, with Quillsilver, that we did quite a bit of work on. And a large portion of that was graphically updating it, because by updating it graphically, and so it was a theater game. So you were creating a theater with a stage, and you had people coming out, and musicians and dancers and all that sort of stuff. So instead of it, what we got was literally a board with squares on it for the worker placement portion, by actually changing that to a stage, and being able to locate things around. So you've got your backstage and your center stage and your audience, and actually locating those things around makes the usability of the game so much clearer in itself, because obviously it's a very thematic game. So having being able to just visually thematically have those things line up, it makes a lot more sense of why, like, of course the lighting and sound is backstage, and like, of course the awards for how well you did in your show are in the audience, so they're watching it. So it all just little things like that. So it sort of depends on what the project is.
Sorry, I'm interrupting there, but do you have, like, I know that obviously I'm going to speak from my own experience, because that's just, I guess, what we do as humans. But like, I know particularly as a graphic designer, but I've also done it when I've done game design commissions, not development, but design. One of the things that I try and ask early is, like, what does success look like for us in this, for you in this project, for my involvement, what's the outcome you're wanting? And as a graphic designer, I might ask that from a client, as in like, okay, you want me to make a poster for you.
Yep.
Well, what's the point of the poster? Are you wanting to sell tickets for your band? Are you wanting to increase sales? Are you wanting to get people to sign up to your newsletter? Like, what's the actual, how are you going to measure success?
Yep.
And I think, so I guess like to bring that to kind of with what you're doing, are there any kind of questions or like things that you might early on in that kind of initial meetings with a client ask them to help you get that scoping or get inside their head a bit about what they want?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that question of what just getting them to pitch the game to you, I think that's usually what they want finding out what they want the game to be is usually the biggest thing, and because that not often but doesn't always align with what the game is. So yeah, knowing what they want the game to be, what their target audience is for the game, what their price point is for the game, definitely where they're like, I guess knowing what they expect of you. So I guess making it clear what you're doing within the time frame, which is usually what is going to determine that for how long you've got the game for. Obviously, the longer you've got it, the more work you can do on it. So yeah.
No, that's fair. Do you have any? Do you have an anecdote or a story of something that's really worked really well, or something that's clicked, like where you and the client have, something's magical happened, for want of a?
So I find I do a bit of contract work for Quicksilver Studio, which I think definitely working with a team I find is always very useful. I think it's something that finding people that you're good at working with, obviously, well, minds are more often than not better than one. So having a group of people around you that you can bounce ideas off, and people that think in slightly different ways to you can always be incredibly useful. Instead of just doing it yourself, where I find that if I'm doing freelance development by myself, it is often working slightly more closely with the designer to have that, I guess, point of contact and be working through what they want. Yeah, and again with Guff, then working with the company and keeping that between everybody else in the team and making sure we're still focused and pushing in the right direction. It's definitely sort of jumping back a little bit, I guess, to what it actually is. I find it's a lot more sort of number crunching and a lot more of the heavier side, making sure everything is functioning and crunching as it should. Yeah, is what a lot of the development ends up being.
Yeah. So do you tend to make big changes or not really?
It depends if they're needed is probably the answer to that.
Yeah.
So look, usually not. Usually the hardest thing is knowing what to cut and what not to cut. So looking at a game and seeing like what I probably do a lot of merging of things. There'll be where a client will have say multiple items or multiple actions in a game, and it's like, well, these are more or less the same thing or close enough that we can actually merge these and simplify this quite a lot, but still keeping what the core of their game is in there and what they've tried to create, keeping the smarts and the interesting thing that they've put in there, but by simplifying it and merging that with other things to make the overall game and experience a better product.
Yeah.
I have a Karl.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Karl. So being on both sides of design and development and working in commission or client work, do you find that with client and commission work you get less attached to the designs?
Definitely, I think so. Obviously, doing it from my own company, it's a little bit more. I think you've got to be careful not to get too close to it, which I think is the problem that the designer ends up having. Which I do myself. It becomes hard to modify what you feel you put years into, and to change some of that stuff. So having a nice, short, concise timeline to be able to actually crunch through things, I think is definitely useful to not get too attached to that.
And
Is
there is
that
that. Sorry, I was just going to say there is that concept of having to sometimes kill your darlings. You've got to be prepared to, if that's what it needs, to say, it was nice knowing you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is perhaps that an
to...
approach? Sorry, Carl. I was
No.
going to say, perhaps is that an approach for budding designers or seasoned designers, that perhaps treating your design as a project in that sense, being your own client, basically, is that a good approach, perhaps?
I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, and to try, and it's funny because I did that just today in a meeting with a game that I'm working on for with another guy, and we were looking at a thing and we're going, this thing isn't quite working, and we went, well, let's just cut it. We'll just remove it. If it's not working, remove it. It's probably not necessary. So yeah, I think it's a useful skill to have. Personally, I think you should always have a separate developer. I think it's very hard to develop your own product. So with Guff, we've said that we won't do any of my games, which was my rule, without someone else doing the development on them. Because even though I think they're great, it doesn't mean they necessarily are. And having someone else come in with a fresh set of eyes who can make those tough choices, I think, is an important thing. And I like how just our industry in general, I think as we're growing, it's becoming more and more of a thing. I think publishers have always sort of done it, but having more studios like Brigger Development and Quillsilver Studio and more freelance people popping up as well, I think it's a valuable thing to make a game stand out in a already crowded space.
And I think that's an important thing, and it's a lesson that I guess I personally need to, well, not need to, because I've been doing it for a while, but when I'm figuring out the costings for my game, like what I'm willing to invest in the game myself, sometimes that might be I'll get an artist to do something if I want to get some art, even if it's just for a prototype, and I might make that choice. I wouldn't always recommend spending money on an artist for a prototype. You may not get the return on investment, but if you want to do it, do it. But I've actually explored a few times with some of my games hiring developers to see if they can kind of do exactly what you said, like make those decisions that I just can't make myself because I am way too close to it, or I can't maybe even see that a decision needs to be made. Because to me it's obvious. Oh yeah, this thing should stay in there. Like, it's funny. I was reading Matthew Dunstan does over the last couple of years has done a really good series of tweets on game design and things like that. And one of the things he mentioned in one from a few months ago was I think it was something like the auction mechanic in your game, get rid of it, or something like that. It was like some grandiose statement, right? And obviously it doesn't apply to everything, but I realized that, for one of my board games I've been working on for like so long now, like years and years, it's got a bidding kind of thing, auction thing at the start for turn order. And I've just kind of gone, do I really need that? Like, maybe I should just chop that. Like, maybe it is better to get rid of that whole. And it has a flow-on effect because I've built parts of the game around that turn order thing. But again, it got me really thinking. It was like, okay, if I do just chop out that mechanic, does it overall help? Like, does it open the space up for a better, element? I don't know. Like, and yes, but I think that the what I'm saying is I agree with you that having other people be able to input into the process, into the thing, can really help, especially if they are also coming at it from how do we make this be more cost effective to produce, which can often mean better price point for customers, or even just a better way to like have, I'm going to say, nicer aesthetics. Like, so there might be a way where, like, you might in your head, like for me, I might think, I want wooden pieces because that's the right way, but someone else might come and go, oh no, if you did them as like standees with cards, it might actually be, we might it might look better and be a better experience. And so sometimes it just takes that outside person, I think. And do you I think I know the answer to this question, but one that I have written down
everybody else doesn't.
Well, I think you've answered it though. Is like, should a designer or do you think a designer or publisher should seek out a developer? Like, is it something that it should just become a part of the process?
Yeah, and I like to think that even small companies, it's usually the publisher. Like if you've got a one-man company that's signed a game, that they are going to be doing the development, whether they actually know that or not. Like that, any sort of editing, is the development. So
development.
Definitely.
Kate or Alana, is there anything else before we wrap up? You wanted to ask?
No, not really. I think developers need to be one of those. It's a step in the process, and it just has to become a part of. We designed it, and now it's time to trim the fat. We talked last week about optimizing your files. Development is optimizing your game. It's tidying it up so that it's neat and there's not bits hanging off that make it unwieldy. It's just, it needs to be a thing that people go, right, sound concept, chop, 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 chop.
Yes. So I think in terms of like your spreadsheet for your costings for your game, I'd say as it's another item, just like an artist or a graphic designer, and even if it is the person doing it themselves, just mentally budget, like time allocating or finance allocating for it, I think can really help. Yeah. All right, Karl, did you have any questions for us before we wrap up? No, you don't have to.
Nah. I was not expecting that one. It's like in an interview and they're like, "Oh, do you have any questions for us?"
I have a remark.
What would you say is your biggest weakness? I'm just being silly. I'm just joking. You know the job interview question.
Biggest weakness.
Yeah, isn't that one of the job? The classic ones.
That's usually a question.
Yeah. I'm way too generous with my time. That's the problem. So
too awesome.
Yeah. Too awesome. You said you had a comment, Alana, or a remark?
Yeah. I was going to say, I like your game wall there, Karl, and I spy a copy of Hand of Fate Ordeals. So
yes,
we were just talking about designing versus developing, and that was one that we commissioned the design from a local designer. So that journey of playing more of the developer role and handing off the design to a commission was on a big box game was an interesting one for our company. So and I think quite fruitful as well. Taking it out of house really, I think, made a better game.
It's interesting musing, I guess, and I think that's not done very much, but there's no reason that it shouldn't be, is getting the design done externally and then doing the development in-house, as in specifically looking for targeting a specific thing, which there's definitely, that seems to be becoming more and more of a thing in the industry as well. Companies are starting to do that a little bit more when they've got very, very specific things in mind, and finding a designer, same as finding an artist that meets your sensibilities of what you're trying to do, finding a designer that fits in a style that you like, and having them design a game for you, even if same as an artist, having someone do just step by step, a little bit at a time, paying them to do a concept, and then paying them to, if you like the concept, paying them to do a initial prototype and so on, is definitely I think a good way to do it. That's interesting. I didn't quite realize that was how Hand of Fate came about.
It was, we had there was quite a few stakeholders in the game, being a licensed being an IP game, but sort of aligning our vision as a publisher, a company, and also the IP holders' vision, and then bringing in an external designer to kind of see their vision through as well, because they were invested in as a fan of the IP, but also they're quite a talented designer as well. So bringing those three things together and sort of having those sort of mesh together to create a workable game was a very different experience for us as a company.
Cool.
I remember visiting. We had a bit of a mini rule and make day in 2015 or 16, early 2016, and I was visiting, and we met at Alan's house, a bunch of us, and played the prototypes of what we're up to, because I'd been working on a commission for you that never happened, and but I remember that Michael brought along the Sharpie on pieces of card version of what
Yep.
became Hand of Fate.
There's a lot of those. Yep.
And I remember, and I don't know if it was the very first one, but it was very close to the first one. I remember like playing it, and there was like all this stuff. He just had like the bare bones of like the idea for the system, and it was very interesting to kind of watch it grow. And
yeah, it was fascinating watching him go through that design process. Yeah,
I find that's a very diverting slightly. As a designer myself, I definitely find I've won a couple of contests that have all had quite strict design goals, or like quite strict constraints. And I think it's a similar thing. It's quite a fun challenge, I think, designing to a strict set of constraints where you're trying to fit something to that as well. So, yeah,
I think you generally get better games when you design by constraint. I really think so. Like there's obviously a case for just throwing everything at the wall and see what sticks, but like I do think designing by constraint is a really good starting point.
Just setting yourself constraints for what you want the game to be before you even if it is your own thing, I think, and checking in with yourself is important to make sure you're hitting what you're trying to do, and you can obviously change that, but
it isn't like the famous saying something along the lines of like limitation inspires innovation or something like that. It's like something in that ballpark.
Sounds like a quote.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah. It's some philosopher probably said it. But I'm totally on board with setting limitations, and I think like as a game designer and even like someone who might be wanting to bring their game to market in some fashion or work with a publisher, I think a really useful metric really is that how much do I think the game I want to sell it for, and then if you can try and get an idea on how much it then costs to actually manufacture it, and there's often a big gap between the retail price and the manufacturing price, that can really then help you go, oh, okay, well, I can't have 200 cards, I can really only have 72, or I can't have 45 dice, it's just impractical. So how do I do it without 45 dice? And I think that's a useful starting point. All right. There was some other question I was going to ask, and I've completely now forgotten it because I sidetracked myself. How good is that? All right. Well, Karl, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been really lovely talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Do you have any places that you'd want to send people, like if they want to find out more about your work or connect with you in some way? Or?
Sure. I probably should have. I'm going to quickly check my phone because I always mix up my which social media is which. So you can find me on Twitter, which is dying, but
we're in a funny stage. It's funny, isn't it?
At Archangel_games. Instagram is also Archangel_games. That's ARKANGEL, which is a anagram of Karl Lange, for funsies. And Archangel Games,
as in ARK_AN
ARKANGEL_. So the underscore between Archangel and Games.
Oh, Archangel. Oh man, I'm not listening very good here.
It's okay, I might not be speaking very good. Or just archangelgames.com. And Guff is guffstudios.com. Nice and simple. And Guff Studios on all social medias. Just one word.
So here we go. Is that Archangel Games correct?
Yeah, that's spot on.
And Guff is just GUF.
Studios. One word.
And that should be there now.
Beautiful.
Oh, magic of technology that lets us type things. Beautiful. Well, oops, let me hide that. Thank you again. Thanks, Kate and Alana, for your time and being a part of all this. It's wonderful working with you and seeing you every week. I genuinely enjoy it. It's a highlight for me. So now let's do the business side of things a little bit. If anyone wants to catch up with us or talk to us about the show or anything else to do with game design, then we would highly encourage you to join our Discord. Our Discord is at ltt.ltd/s/discord. And hop in there and talk about either manufacturing, game design, whatever your thoughts to do with it. We are obviously from Launch Tabletop, and we produce. We have a platform called Launch Lab where we produce. We help creators and game designers produce their games in short runs, and so there's no minimum. So you can also talk to us about that. And I've been your host, Eris, and this is Materialise. I'm just going through my list. I'm not doing very good. I need to get better with this script, don't I?
You're doing great.
So yeah, if you want to find out more about, yes, that's right. If you do go to Launch Lab, remember to put in, if you make an order, you can put in the code Materialise. That's Materialise into the checkout, and you'll get 20% off your next order. That's before shipping, so not including shipping. And signing up for account at Launch Lab is free, so just check it out. One of the things that we've had, I think, with a few people is it's hard to describe sometimes what the system can kind of do. Like the words don't do it justice. And so I do really encourage people, if you have games that you want to, try out with this kind of print on demand stuff, then I really do recommend go to launchtabletop.com, create an account for free. All the payment stuff only happens if you actually make an order. There's none of that's part of the account creation process. And then just have an experiment. So like talking about limitations, one of the things that I genuinely do is I will go through the system and go, okay, if I have this many cards and if I put this component in here and this, what can I do with that? And it's getting me kind of inspired to try and work on some designs with those limitations, like thinking, okay, if I put it in this box with this thing. And so like I found that a useful tool for me. That's everything. So we will now go to our outro video, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Do we want to talk about what we're doing next week?
Do we want to talk? Yes, we do. I haven't. See, it's not in my notes because I forgot to put it in the notes. So thank you, Kate. What are we doing next week, Kate?
I think we're talking to Nick.
We are. And who's Nick?
Nick is our CEO. He's very nice.
He is the CEO. Yeah. So we've got Nick coming on from Launch Tabletop, and he's obviously one of the founders, along with Alana, of the company. And so we're going to hear from him about his background in board game manufacturing and why he's helped start Launch Tabletop. So thank you, Kate. I had totally, like I said, it wasn't in my notes. I just forgot. And then I believe the week after we're possibly having Joel on, who's your husband your partner and designer of the games Unfair and Funfair, which are both very
blurry
enjoyable.
Behind me.
Blurry behind you. Yeah. So in a couple of weeks we'll be hopefully talking to Joel, and awesome. All right. Thanks for that video. All right. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bloopers at the end.